Welcome to episode 351 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agents Lou Calvarese and Melissa Fortunato, who review their undercover roles in Operation Royal Charm, an investigation that dismantled an international smuggling ring bringing in to the U.S. illegal drugs, cigarettes, and counterfeit $100 bills known as North Korean supernotes. The smuggling ring also conspired to bring in North Korean weapons. The investigation incorporated parallel undercover operations, Operation Royal Charm in New Jersey and Operation Smoking Dragon in Los Angeles. A total of 59 individuals from around the world were arrested in 11 locations in the U.S. A total of 87 people were charged. Retired agent Lou Calvarese served in the FBI for 30 years. While in the Bureau, he worked truck hijacking, organized crime, gangs, terrorism, and surveillance. However, most of his career was spent undercover, successfully posing as a mobster, contract killer, international weapons dealer, and drug dealer. Lou received numerous awards throughout his career, including the coveted FBI Director's Award for Distinguished Service. Lou appeared on CBS News with Katie Couric, and his story and Operation Royal Charm have been featured on several true crime shows. Retired agent Melissa Fortunato served in the FBI for over 23 years. She was assigned to the New York and Cleveland field offices. Her investigative work focused primarily on public corruption and white-collar crime cases, and, in the later part of her career, drug trafficking and domestic terrorism. Melissa was recognized with the U.S. Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service for her part in a large-scale public corruption investigation. She also operated as a crisis negotiator for 15 years and led the FBI Cleveland's crisis negotiations team, successfully resolving many high-stakes negotiations, including kidnap for ransom and barricaded subject cases. As a certified undercover agent, Melissa operated both domestically and internationally. Her undercover portfolio included transnational organized crime, public corruption, drug trafficking, and counterintelligence matters. Melissa now shares her knowledge and experience as a trainer and consultant, specializing in conflict resolution and negotiation as the founder of Alchemy Teams LLC, where she contracts with organizations including the Bureau Consortium, a multidisciplinary team of FBI experts and elite practitioners working with clients to manage the complexities of violence and threat mitigation. Stay tuned for the end of the case review, where Melissa, Lou, and I discuss the new movie inspired by Operation Royal Charm's undercover wedding. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and where you can learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Lou Calvarese and retired agent Melissa Fortunato. Hey, Lou.
Hey, Jerry, how are you?
Hey, Melissa.
Hi, Jerry.
All right, so several years ago, I did a case review with Bob Hamer, episode 79, and I understand that his case, Operation Smoking Dragon, which took place in the LA division, was a parallel case to this undercover investigation that we're going to talk about today, Operation Royal Charm. Lou, why don't you go first? And I want to make sure everybody understands Melissa had a big role in this undercover operation, but her part is going to be towards the midpoint and end of this case review. Is that right, Melissa?
That is right. Lou was involved for many years prior, and I came in toward the end. And so Lou will take the lead on this one in the beginning, and I'll jump in, and my part comes up.
Very good. All right, Lou, it's on you. Where do you want to start?
We could start from the beginning. The case was predicated on source information. Now, if I may be able to take you back, how this source ended up coming to us, which is pretty crazy in a way. He was a mob guy out of New York City. He was connected to one of the families, but he was a moneymaker. How he comes to us is he ends up doing a human trafficking of 14 Chinese nationalist women. And his MO, so to speak, was to go through Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He would pay the chief of police there $5,000 for them to have access to go through Haiti into the United States. However, this particular time, I guess it wasn't enough money, but the chief of police ended up throwing the source in jail. He had nobody to call because on this particular situation, he wasn't going to give a kickback to the family in New York. So he ended up in this jail, and it was very deplorable, according to him. He said the cell was so crowded that they had to sleep standing up, and the cell was a bathroom, defecating and peeing in the cell. He said he couldn't take it. In order to get out of there, he ended up contacting the American consulate. When they talked to him, he said he had some really good information and that he needed to talk to the FBI, particularly agents in the Newark division. These agents ended up interviewing him, and he ended up talking about a Russian international organized crime syndicate that piqued their ears. And in conversation with them, he said, listen, I'm going to need maybe at least 2 undercover agents that look Italian. They're the ones that are going to be controlling the ports, Port Newark and Port Elizabeth, because the Russians believe that the Italians control the port. In doing so, we end up, it was myself and Tom Zykowski, who was better known as the Z-Man, and the name of the case was called Red Fleet. And it had to deal with murder for hire, money laundering, counterfeit cigarettes. And in the end, we ended up meeting the former deputy director of the KGB in Zurich, Switzerland, in reference to 2,000 AK-47s. We ended up arresting and convicted 45 people. It was a 4-year investigation. It worked out really well, except for one thing. One of the Russians that we arrested while in jail put a hit out on myself and Tommy. And so consequently, our families had to leave the residences for almost 2 weeks until they finally resolved that matter. Sometimes a lapse of maybe a couple of months or so, and the source ended up saying, look, I also ran into some people, and they're part of an Asian international smuggling ring, and it's pretty extensive. The handling agents were out of Newark. There was a little bit of consternation going on as far as the handling with the source and so forth, but the case ended up going from Newark, New Jersey, down to Atlantic City. Tommy was part of the Atlantic City RA, and the source ended up going down there also. The case was then transferred to a female agent by the name of Jody Petracci, and she was an excellent agent and was going to handle the case. She ended up having cancer and subsequently passed away, which was unfortunate. Nick Llanos was then the case agent as far as Royal Trine was concerned. Based on the information the source was providing, we ended up initiating a warehouse fully stocked with boxes, so forth, a forklift, wired, video, audio. We had a task force of ATF, U.S. Customs, state police, local law enforcement, and coming along would be the Secret Service. So that's how we ended up setting it up. Then we set up a time to meet with Charles and May Liu. Now, Charles and May Liu could have been someone's grandparents. I mean, you would never in a million years suspect them as far as doing anything bad. That's for sure. When we meet with them, we're in conversation. We talk about container loads of counterfeit cigarettes. We talk about AK-47s. May all of a sudden starts to look at us and she's whispering mafia, mafia. And Tommy looked at her as if to acknowledge yes, but not saying yes. And then she looked at us and, just more or less thought that, yeah, they are. That added a lot of credence as far as all this stuff was concerned. Charles was a graduate from Seton Hall, political science. He graduated with May. She worked for the World Bank, and they lived in Gettysburg, Maryland. But it took so long for this investigation to really get going. Charlie ended up going back and forth from China and in long periods. Now, the thing about it is Charlie had a lot of contacts. They knew the general in charge of weapons production and the deputy minister of intelligence for the Chinese government. So they were very well connected as far as arms are concerned and so forth.
Sounds like they had been living in the United States because he went to college here for a long time, but they still had these criminal element connections in China. Were they American citizens?
Yes, they were. It just took a long time for this to develop. I'm talking about a year and a half almost, just about, where he's been going back and forth from China for like periods of time, 3 months, 2 months, 4 months, or whatever. But then all of a sudden he gets back early in 2001. And now we start having, meetings and conversations in regards to, the AK-47s and so forth. Then because of this constant going back and forth from China, he turns around and tells us, look, I could set up a meeting with the general and you guys in Hong Kong in reference to the AK-47s as far as distribution is concerned. Tommy and I went, oh, that's great. But when we presented it to management, they didn't take it too seriously. And in retrospect, you think about it, it's been a year and a couple of months, and, nothing has really happened. I mean, we were in conversations back and forth, that type of thing or whatever, but nothing of any value or whatever. So I could see them being a little bit skeptical as far as that was concerned. However, this seemed to be on the money. We ended up going to a social event, Tom and I, and it happened to be a luncheon. And we run into the ASAC, and she was in charge of the Atlantic City RA. We were talking to her, discussing it as far as it looks like we might be going to Hong Kong. We're in contact. We're going to be in contact with this general, talking about AK-47s and distribution. And she turned around and says, oh, that sounds really great. She convinced the supervisor that this looked like a pretty good situation to do. Why the supervisor was hesitant, I really don't know.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
I don't have the answer to that. But I will say, in my experience, Lou, tell me if this is true for you. Sometimes people had a more negative view of undercover cases or undercover agents. Sometimes they thought it was a scam and you just get to go out to dinners and you get to take fancy trips. And sometimes I think they looked at it from that perspective more so than this is an investigation and a way to gather evidence. I wonder if the supervisor had that kind of thought process initially.
Melissa, I didn't really want to say that, but you hit it right on the head.
And I think that was true in my experience, not even to that particular supervisor. I had similar conversations on the other end from people in management or even other agents thinking it's all a bit of a scam sometimes.
Yes. He didn't think well of undercovers. He was a micromanager. And for some reason, the undercover aspect of it, just like what you said, he thought that we're like prima donnas because we were going out with these people, had all these meals, you drove around in nice cars, so forth and so on. And he didn't think you get a bang for the buck.
He didn't want you to take a trip to Hong Kong? It didn't look like work to him.
Right. But between a source and undercovers in the FBI, as you all know, you develop a lot of really, really good cases. At that particular point in time, 9/11 happens and the arms deal was going out the window, which took so long to develop. Charlie didn't want anything to do with it, obviously, because of the security and so forth and so on. But he definitely wanted to do the counterfeit cigarettes. That's his meal ticket. Right around this time, Tom has a file review. Tom did a case. It was a gang case, and it was very good. It worked out really well. I can't even remember how many people they arrested, but they confiscated a number of guns, and the case was already completed. And these guns, as evidence, needed to be disposed of. Well, Tommy, he held on to it. Why he didn't dispose of it at any particular time, I have no idea. Now, the Z-Man, he was a great undercover, a good agent, and he's a big teddy bear. But he doesn't resolve the issue as far as the guns are concerned. He refuses to do it. I said to him, well, are you crazy? I said, they're going to take you off the case. I said, do it. Even Jack and I, Garcia, had an intervention with him to do this, and he refused. So what happened was the supervisor ended up taking him off the case. I went back into the supervisor and I said, listen, we have a lot of continuity between us and Charles and May. May wants to take him ballroom dancing, for God's sake. That's the kind of relationship that was going on there. But he turned around and said, no, he's off. He's out. Anybody who talked to Tommy Zykowski, you really, really liked him. And he would do anything for you. If he had his last dollar bill in his pocket, he'd give it to you. Tommy passed away in 2014. He was just a good egg. So we turned around and said, well, now what are we going to do? Jack, who was working out of the New York division, and he had his own cases, he was going to intercede on the part of Tommy. So what happens is Tommy, me, and Jack go down to Maryland for lunch, and we meet up with Charles and May. We tell them, Tommy, he's going to be doing something different for the family, and Jack is going to take his place. Jack has to go to the bathroom, so he leaves, and May leans towards me, and she goes, he's pretty cute. I said, yeah. I said, yeah, May, and I'm saying, whoa, Tommy, that was quick. Color you gone, and here comes Jack.
Yeah. Tommy who?
Tommy who? So I knew then Jack was okay, and Tommy was going to be out as far as Royal Charm is concerned. This is right around the time that we finally get our first shipment in, and it's going to go to New York. So Charlie would tell me the container number, the bill of lading, toys, or whatever you want to label it. Then I would tell the case agent, Nick Llanos. Nick Llanos would then call Customs. Customs would then set aside the container. Our guys would go pick it up and bring it into the warehouse. And then there was no tax stamps on the cigarettes, so forth. And then they had it, it was inspected. And then Charlie would come and he would then give me the information as far as where is it going to New York. We had audio, video, and that type of thing. I would then go to New York, meet up with whomever, talk to him in reference to the load and whatever else he may have needed. Did they do drugs or this, that, or the other thing? We had anything at their disposal. So I ingratiated myself with them, and then, I would leave. And that's how we ended up starting.
Let me just make sure we're clear. So what Charlie is asking you to do is to facilitate this container of cigarettes coming through customs. He thinks he's paying the mob to help him with this.
Oh, yeah. Yes, precisely. The load went to New York. Nothing happened. He's content. Charlie tells me the process as far as the container is concerned. So what he does is he's over there in China, a container load of cigarettes, say Marlboro Reds, Newport 100s, that type of thing. There's 964 master cartons to a container. There's 60 cartons to a master. So there's so many cigarettes. It cost him $125,000 for the 40-foot container. Then it cost him another $20,000 to pay off the port official in order to get the container out to sea. But the one container, if it gets through and into the States, their profit margin is $1 million to $1.5 million as far as what they can make, which is unbelievable. And the other thing is they sell this to these bodegas and within their own community. So nothing branches out into other areas. And the packaging, you couldn't tell the difference between the fake cigarettes or the Philip Morris cigarettes. And also what was happening was that Philip Morris was sending tobacco to China. And so what the Chinese were doing, they were mixing Philip Morris's tobacco in with theirs to create the cigarette. Now, Tommy was a smoker. So he started to smoke a couple of these cigarettes, the fake ones. He said, they're a little bit harsher, but that's it. I said, you're kidding me. He goes, no, they had something going there. And then, Charlie confided in me. He goes, let me tell you something. There's 4 manufacturing plants in China. And I want to tell you, they can practically duplicate counterfeit anything, any commodity that you can possibly think of. There's so much distribution and production, you can't believe it. Initially, we were charging them $50,000 to bring it in, and then $5,000 to transport it if, in fact, we were going to go out to California. $3,000 if it was a local transport, and that's what we were doing. So then Charlie said to me, he goes, listen, I'm having a hard time getting money out of the U.S. I was thinking to myself, because he's so cheap. The money was stuck to his pants, for God's sake. He was unbelievable. So I said, listen, I have friends in the banking industry. I can do it for 4% on the money. And he said, that's great. Now, to get back to Charlie and Meg, as far as being cheap, for the year and a half or so or whatever, we took them to lunch. We took them to dinner. And I want to tell you, their hands never came out of their pockets. I mean, no matter what was happening, as far as even this particular shipment to New York, and everything went well and nothing happened, and he never reciprocated in any way, shape, or form. We would go for a cup of coffee. Jerry, I kid you not, he never paid at all.
Tell us a little bit more about his lifestyle. So you said he was cheap, but was he rich?
I'm trying to remember the cars, but they weren't fancy cars or anything like that. Like a mid-sized car, nothing crazy. His dress, very conservative, chinos, a nice sweater. She was very pantsuits, up to date. I never knew where they lived or went there. I think May was more like I would say like a romantic. Charlie was, I guess, hardly ever around. I think she was lonely. And so the interest in Tommy and Jack.
And I know how charming Jack could be, so I'm sure she loved being around him.
Yeah, Jack was a piece of work. But I tell you what, I mean, she got a kick out of Tommy. As a matter of fact, she went as far as to say she loved to go ballroom dancing.
Well, they both played their undercover roles very well. What about you? She didn't want to go ballroom dancing with you?
No, she didn't want to go ballroom dancing with me. She liked Tommy and she liked Jack.
I think she had a type, Lou.
Maybe. Hey, Mel. But you think about it. I mean, she's petite. She's like 4'6" or something like that. And maybe soaking wet, 100 pounds?
Okay, Lou. So how tall are you as compared to Tommy and Jack?
I'm 5'11". Jack and Tommy are 6'4". So
okay, so that's our answer, Melissa.
Could be more than height, but yeah. We all have different tastes.
Yes. Yeah, that's for sure. Charlie was very mundane, monotone type, very soft-spoken, never really yelled or anything like that, no matter what was happening. And here goes part of him, being cheap. So one of the loads would come in, and it was destined for California. And prior to that, I said to him, listen, in California, you better have a dock ready for when we deliver this stuff. This way, we're in and out. You get a forklift in, take the stuff out, and it's all hidden, and that's it. So sure enough, we're destined for California. We go. Guys get out there. It took them about a week to get out there. I flew out there, and then I met one of the guys out there. He was a buyer. And, I ingratiated myself with him, talked to him. So I said, where's the dock? And he goes, I'm going to take you to it. We go and about a mile, not even a mile, down, and there's this empty trailer. And we're going to do now a back-to-back. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, we're on some side street. And then all of a sudden, these about 6 or 7 guys roll up in 2 cars. And they're going to be the ones that are going to offload all this stuff, 964 master cartons, into this other clean trailer. Now I'm starting to fume because now I'm out here myself, along with our driver, our undercover guys. I take a walk 2-3 blocks up. There's a major highway. And now I'm seeing police cars going back and forth. Now I'm beside myself. I call Charlie up, and I'm just livid. I'm screaming at him. I said, you cheap such and such. This isn't going to happen again. I'm going to charge you extra because, number one, if in fact a police car happened to come down and back to back on a side street, there's something up. There's no question about that, as far as that's concerned. So that was going to be a problem.
But it worked out in your favor as far as authenticating your role or legitimizing who you were supposed to be. The fact that you were so angry made it appear that you really were a member of the mob involved in illegal activity.
Oh yeah, Jerry. Yeah, definitely. There's no question about that. As a matter of fact, it would have been something probably a lot harsher to Charlie when you're expecting one thing, especially the security of it, as opposed to being put out in the open and looks like you're going to get caught or something. So definitely you didn't want that. That's for sure. Charlie at times really drove me crazy. So now what we were doing, and we were doing this throughout, we ended up delivering these cigarettes to California, Pennsylvania, Chicago, New York, and Canada. And I'm not going to get into every one of these things as far as who I dealt with or whatever, but in Chicago, we did a number of container loads with Harold Soms. He was the main guy in Chicago, and he had a little sidekick, a guy by the name of John DeRisi, who was more into the drug aspect than he was into counterfeit cigarettes. And so in doing these loads, one of the guys had an idea. Keith Tang will come up later on, but I'll incorporate him now since I'm talking about Harold Soms, to get Keith Tang, who has counterfeit cigarettes, and send it over to Harold Soms, who is a distributor. So what happens is Keith ends up sending him a container load of cigarettes, of Marlboro Reds and Lights. And Harold, who we dealt with before and has liked what was going on as far as Charlie's concerned, he gets this particular load. And what happens is he starts to distribute it. And the people that he's distributing it to turn around and say, these are the worst cigarettes we've ever had.
But Tommy said they were okay.
Yeah, Tommy said they were okay. But see, this one was coming from Keith. So I don't know what was going on, but I'll explain what I think was happening here. Harold gets all bent out of shape. It was a complete load. He sold some of it. So now he's all bent out of shape, Harold. And so I said, look, why don't you come up to the apartment in Atlantic City? I'll bring Keith. I bring him over. And it was further discussed before them coming up that Soms would give Keith $75,000 of what, he sold, Harold Soms sold. So he's up there, and Harold Soms let him have it. He just turned around saying, I never had worse cigarettes, blah, blah, blah. And they went back and forth or whatever. Then I interceded, and Harold, he wasn't appreciative or whatever. He was all bent out of shape, still bent out of shape. And then he just walked out. Well, then Keith walks over to me, and he says, listen, if you want something to happen to this guy, just, let me know. I said, no, Keith, this is strictly business. I'll take care of Harold. Don't you worry about a thing. In one way, and believe me, Keith is a mild-mannered guy, family-oriented guy, but he does have another side. He was there to protect me. And here's one of the reasons why I think this load was bad going to Chicago, is because of the fact I don't think the Chinese wanted to get their cigarettes out there in the open and be exposed. And I think they just wanted to keep it within their community. Keith never confided in me in saying that or, whatever. I don't know whether because I said to him, why don't you get involved? I said, Charlie's been involved with this guy, so forth and so on. To this day, I still don't know the reasoning behind it, but I think it was because of the fact that they didn't want the merchandise to be exposed, especially say like in Chicago or that type of thing, or anything to come back to them. So that's one of the things I was thinking about, as far as that was concerned. And that's what happened. And, I like Keith. So that was a whole different situation.
He liked you too. He was willing to take someone out just to prove that to you.
Yes. That was my thinking. And that goes along with something's going to happen down the road. So yeah. And that's why I felt comfortable with Keith. Now all the deliveries are made and all we have is counterfeit cigarettes. And we developed a network. We know where everybody is. They've all accepted these counterfeit cigarettes, distributions, money laundering with some of these people. The United States Attorney's Office says, listen, we don't have anywhere else to go.
What did you think was left to do? You had the counterfeit cigarettes. Good case, wrap it up.
Yeah, but I wanted more. I wanted something more than that. Whatever it be, like drugs, arms, just something with a little bit of tickle to it, Yeah, it was great that we, developed a network. This is how they do things. But I wanted something a little bit more. And thank God for Keith Tang. All of a sudden, I receive a call from Keith He says, you remember me. I was with Charlie on one of those container loads and I saw you. He goes, I'd like to meet with you. I said, okay. I call Jack up and we meet him in Fort Lee, New Jersey at a restaurant. And all of a sudden, Keith starts talking to me. Hey, I'd like to be the number one guy. I want this container to go. I said, whoa, I've been dealing with Charlie and all these loads and so forth and so on. I want you to do for me. I don't care what you can get your hands on, arms, drugs, whatever it may be, but I want you to do for me. And once you do that, I said, you'll be the number one guy. He goes, all right, I'll tell you what, give me a month. I said, okay. And sure enough, right around that month, he calls me up and he said, I'd like to meet. So I said, meet me at my apartment. I get Jack. So it's Jack and I, and Keith comes in. And then I said, well, what do you got for us? And then he hands out to Jack and I these 3 $100 bills. Now I'm looking at it and I'm no expert or anything, but I'm trying to feel the quality, that type of thing or whatever. And I can't. And Jack, he couldn't tell the difference either. He goes, look, they're counterfeit. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I said, let me bring this to some people and then I'll get back to you. We hand it over to the case agent. They give it to Secret Service. Next thing you know, Secret Service comes up and says, hey, these are super notes. We haven't seen these. We want to know the source, where it's coming from.
You're going to have to explain to everyone who has not heard the other interview that I did what a super note is.
Yeah, the super note came out in the papers as a high quality type of counterfeit money. I would take umbrage with that to say you couldn't tell the difference between their $100 bill and our $100 bill. That's how good of a counterfeit it was.
This was back in the early 2000s before they took countermeasures to make sure that we could tell whether or not it was counterfeit. These super notes were so realistic that you couldn't tell that it was not a minted United States government $100 bill.
Yeah. I won't explain to you how they were checking these out. Obviously, Secret Service wanted to know the source. I get in with Keith and I said, listen, I got to know where this is all coming from. We got to meet this guy because I want to start to order up some stuff. So now I'm talking to the case agent, and the case agent, he says, look, how about we go to Phuket, Thailand? And I said, Phuket, Thailand? He goes, well, I honeymooned there. I said, oh, Phuket sounds pretty good. So I get back to Keith and I tell him, look, how about Phuket, Thailand? What do you think of that? He goes, great. I know the chief of police there. I said, oh, yeah? He goes, he's got a stable of women. He goes, let me tell you something. Once you get into your room, you're never going to come out. He goes, I'm telling you that right now. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll take care of you. I said, oh, yeah, okay, Keith, no problem. And now I'm thinking, well, I'm married and let's see how that's going to go over.
Well, I mean, with the things you had to do.
For God and country, hey, but I don't think my wife would have appreciated something like that, especially if you went to trial and they started talking about your little exploits,
So that's a no-go. Now you're concerned about the fact that if you go there, how are you going to be able to justify not taking advantage of the offer of female companionship?
Right, exactly. So that's when I was talking to the case agent. And so he said, well, look, a little bit of a dilemma. How about a girlfriend? If you brought somebody, what do you think? I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. He goes, do you have anybody in mind? And that's where Melissa comes in because we were extras on a white collar crime case. So I got to know her and I thought if she was available that she would be pretty good for this part. So I called Jack up. I said, listen, guess where we're going? He goes, where? I said, we're going to go to Phuket, Thailand. He goes, you're going, but I'm not. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm telling you, I can't go. I said, why can't you go? He goes, because even on a 747 or a 777 airplane, I can't fit in the bathroom. I said, what? You fly all over the place. He goes, no, I don't fly all over the place. I fly to Miami. I go back and forth. It's a 2-hour flight and I'm fine.
It's a 24-hour flight to Phuket. At some point, you have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I'd say so, Jerry. I'd say so. So now I'm talking to Nikki and he says, well, Mark picked up Keith a couple of times at the airport, brought him back and forth, and he's been in the warehouse. So it's a familiar face. And Mark was an undercover. And so we said, well, okay, Mark, because Keith knows him. And so that, give him a little bit more of a comfort zone. So with that, Monique answered the call. And then the four of us ended up meeting with Nick as if we didn't know what was in store for us. Nicky turns around, he goes, you got to act like a couple. You have to kiss, hold hands, when you're in public, especially you're around them, you got to act accordingly, that type of thing. And
it might be time to bring Melissa in.
Yeah.
Tell us, what you thought when you were approached with this. And if you know anything about, was her name Monique?
Monica. And I did come to know her, but I did not know her prior. So just a little backstory was Lou had been working undercover cases for years and years and years, to the point that he was doing that exclusively. I was on the complete opposite end. I had just gone to the undercover school, maybe a year or so prior, and I was just beginning my undercover career at this time. And one of the things that I did was go to be party filler at another undercover case, which is where Lou and I met for the first time. It was a great way for us to talk to each other, get to know each other. No heavy lifting on my part or even on Lou's part, probably for that case. So when Lou mentioned he was going to need a female undercover to go with him and threw my name out, I then get the call on the other end asking if I'd be willing to just go on this 2-week trip to Thailand to help him not be in a compromising position. So for me, it was a win, right? I mean, you're getting a 2-week trip and I am just coming in and I don't even know the whole backstory of this case at the time. So Lou and I meet, we talk a little bit about, do we think we can pull this off? Are we both on board with each other going and being in this capacity? Now, Lou, we can talk about this, but there were some awkwardness going into this undercover because like Lou said, Keith had connections to law enforcement over there. There were concerns about how much they would be able to pay off maybe housekeeping, come into our rooms, and maybe get a better assessment of our interactions. So Lou and I had to stay in the same hotel room together for the 2 weeks that we were there. Same for the other couple of Mark and Monica. And it's just awkward. We're literally two professionals that work in completely different FBI offices. We had met and probably talked for an hour or two before.
Right.
And then you're thrown in together for 2 straight weeks. And Jerry, you probably know from your life experience, vacations can make or break couples, even imaginary couples. And so it's a lot of time together. And you hope, because this whole big case is hanging in the balance of right. You two getting along. And I guess you can never predict how that really is going to go. For Lou and I, thankfully, I think we bonded in the awkwardness of that situation. The other couple, I think it just made it harder for them to interact. And I think that's kind of where our case went from there. Yeah. But Lou's right that we sat down with the case agent, Nick, and Nick is an undercover himself. And so he did understand the situation. But he was saying, I need to know, to me, as a new undercover, as a female undercover, that you're going to be able to pull this situation off. And so he said, I think he actually said to me, if Lou wants to smack you on the behind, you got to be okay with that and not get upset.
Why would I do? I mean, but I mean, of all things to say, that.
I understand it, though. You're talking about being intimate in a public setting.
Right.
You know what's so funny? You are totally right. But Lou makes a great point. And this is why I benefited so much from the experience of Lou being this seasoned undercover, was if you're married, Jerry, in your romantic relationships, to establish that you guys are a couple, it doesn't mean that your partner is doing all these things to you to lend to the credibility of your relationship.
Yeah, that's true.
Lou always had this wonderful perspective, and it's something that I picked up that was really good, is that you have to really think about it in the context of reality. You don't need to do that to make people believe that you're a couple.
Right. It's not a movie.
Correct. But people get lost in the movie and they worry about how it looks. And so Lou said, and I agreed with him, and he said, don't worry, we'll be able to figure it out. I'm not worried about that part. And I said, I understand what I'm walking into. I'm comfortable with it, and we will make this work.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about, watching movies and, how the guy face lights up when the love interest enters the room, and my husband and I barely say hello to each other in the morning. But we have a great marriage, so I get what you're talking about.
We were playing newer love interests. So luckily for me, Lou's face did light up when I walked in a room. So it made it very believable.
Well, anybody looking at you, your face would light up. What are you talking about? So, anyhow.
Did you have a significant other, Melissa? I know that Lou said he did, so I would love to hear if you told your significant others about this setup and what their thoughts were about it.
So I'll jump in first. I did have a significant other. It is my husband now. He was not my husband at the time. We were dating. I think we were living together. We were not engaged. He is or was an FBI agent. And of course I told him. It'd be weird if I disappeared for 2 weeks. But he didn't love it. He was a little uncomfortable about the fact that we were going to have to stay together in the room. And so we had a long conversation about it. And I had to say, I understand why you're uncomfortable. This is also my career. This is something I want to be involved in. And I need you to trust that we can do this. And so he did, but he did not love the idea.
Yeah.
And Lou, on your side too, you had a similar conversation.
Yeah, I did. I come home and I said, hey, hon, look, I'm going to Phuket, Thailand. And I said, I'm going to be staying with a female agent, and I'm going to be sleeping with her for 10 days. So which was unbelievable. She goes, okay. I said, okay. And she said, well, she's there for your protection too. And I said, oh, I didn't even think of it that way. I mean, but she thought of it more as a protection thing, not even thinking about the typical thing that you would think about as far as sleeping together and that type of thing or whatever. I was really surprised by that comment. But then the next comment was, she said to me, she goes, well, is she beautiful? I said, well, yeah. And she said, that's all right. It's okay. You know what, Jerry, if the shoe was on the other foot, I think I'd be more in line with Melissa's husband in a way, let's just put it this way, circumspect as far as that's concerned. But I mean, and like what Melissa says, I'm an agent and this is what I want. This is what I want to do. And
trust me,
it's a lot of trust. But you know what it is too? If you think about it, now you're in with these people. He's saying he knows the chief of police. That's one thing. Jimmy, you don't know hardly any about his background other than the fact that he was a karate expert, and in 1980 he was supposed to be in the Olympics, and that he was a drug dealer and he can possibly get arms from North Korea. Other than that, there's a lot of uncertainty that was filtering around as far as that was concerned. And then we'll get into a couple of things down the road, which causes some concern. So there's a lot of outside things that are going on too. And we're all there to help each other. So it's, do I say tension? There's a lot entailed with it.
Let me ask a question, because before you were introduced to these super notes, they were thinking about you shutting the case down. So I'd love to get an understanding of what management and the U.S. Attorney's Office is saying now that you've got this super note.
Oh, it was bells and whistles. I mean, the Bureau was willing to, it was unlimited amount of whatever we wanted. You needed cars, you got cars. You needed manpower, you got manpower. You need money. Anything that you wanted, we got because of this case, because of the super notes. And then eventually, getting into the arms deal. Every time we started talking, and then they got into super notes, they got into arms. I mean, everybody was excited about it. I mean, I can't tell you after we consummate this deal in Thailand how everybody was so elated. How about it, Mel? I mean, they wanted to take us out to dinner, do all the, I mean, it was crazy.
And I think it goes to the importance of undercover cases and the long-term relationship building that Lou and Jack and Tommy had done, and nothing had happened. People hadn't got arrested. They were making money, and people like Keith wanted to get in on that, right? Because they saw the success of it. They saw they could make money. And each time they made money, they had like a new idea. And that's where it led to counterfeit cigarettes and drugs. Then it was arms. Then it was this. It just kept growing. The other side saw it as a way to keep making money. The case itself was making money. So we're not even taking FBI funds to do it.
We were self-sufficient. I mean, everything. The apartment, the cars, the travel, we paid for ourselves.
And that was because, Lou, the targets on the other side were paying you money to smuggle in their goods, right?
Right, yeah.
The Bureau is making money off the targets, and it's going right in to fund and build the legend and credibility of the Undercover case, and will for future generations.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. I mean, you think about the amount of money we made. We were charging $60,000 a container load. We did close to, I think, 20 container loads. $5,000 for transportation, $3,000 for local transportation. I mean, we were hitting them left and right. Then we're charging them 4% of the money to wire transfer their money into the banks in China.
But that only worked because you were dealing in cigarettes. And so the Bureau and the U.S. Attorney's Office were okay with those cigarettes walking. But they wouldn't have been okay to let guns and supernotes walk.
Well, yeah, no, because in one of the meetings we were about to discuss, we had told Jimmy that we wanted exclusivity on this money as far as the money coming into the States, and he, as a bad guy, he assured us now, whether you can take him at his word, who the heck knows? But I mean, there's a lot of checks and balances when they're here, surveillances, this, that, and the other thing, wiretaps, you name it. So he can't get away with too much as far as if there was something more to it. Now, when you talk about drugs and the arms, well, they're at the end of the case. And so when you're ready to take the case down or whatever, you order up. You order up, 400 keys of this. You want all these arms or whatever, you can do with that. I'll tell you this, if that London bombing did not happen, I don't know how long this would have been. We'll discuss this a little bit later. But we were all set for the arms deal. When the London bombings happened, we had given them everything we wanted. They said, okay. We were about ready to pay them a certain amount. But Jimmy, he always wanted the money, and the money was drugs. He wanted to push 400 kilos of heroin, and that was his main gig. He could deal with kilos of coke out of Peru, crystal meth, and which he gives us. He was wheeling and dealing with that. He had a plethora of outlets for all kinds of things. I mean, the drugs, the arms.
Jerry, one other thing to think about is Lou and Tommy and Jack, our side had set the story up that they were buying drugs and arms from them. They were giving it to Lou and Jack and Tommy with the understanding that they were going to do something with it on their own criminal enterprise.
That's correct. That's right.
So it wasn't like the cigarettes where you were facilitating them bringing it in. You were actually buying it. You were the end user.
Correct. And so the issue of things walking, they wouldn't know what Lou and Jack, as part of their undercover criminal enterprise, were going to do with those things. They were just happy to get the money. Is that correct, Lou?
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
But it came to a point in one of the meetings we have, after we're talking about the arms thing, Keith says to me, well, where are these AK-47s going? I said, well, some of them are going to stay in the States, but the majority of it's going to South America. There's some of our friends there that we are affiliated with. And he figured out what I was talking about, drug dealers, that type of thing. He was okay with it. He tells Jimmy that, and that flew. They liked it.
All right. Can you take us back to Phuket and how that trip goes? I don't want to skip that.
Oh, so now we, in order to get to know each other, we go to Bangkok before going to Phuket, just to get to know each other. So now while in Bangkok, we're like typical couples. We're going out, we're on these tut-tuts. We would drive along and then we'd hit a couple of the temples and then we'd see the town. The Thai people were fantastic, more than glad to help you. But let's face it, Bangkok at the time, I mean, it was decadent. There were all kinds of different types of people there. We went to this restaurant/club. We go in there, we're having a cocktail or two, and then I have to go to the bathroom. Nicky said he had to go. He's right behind me. Now, I'm walking towards the bathroom, which I perceive it to be and look like it was men's. As you walk in further, there's all these women in there. And I turned around to Nikki and I said, hey, we're in the wrong bathroom. He starts laughing. He goes, no, we're not. I said, you're kidding me. And I walk a little bit further and it was all about selling sex and whatever you wanted. It was just crazy there. You go to wash your hands and there was somebody right there. It was a bit crazy.
We got to be clear. Those women are in the men's bathroom soliciting you for their sexual services.
You hit it right on the head. And the thing about it was cheap. I mean, real cheap.
You are in a bathroom. It's not the most luxurious setting.
No, it's not. No, I tell you, it was. It wasn't just one or two. There had to be at least 6 or 7 women in there. So we walk out of there, and
Oh, I got to stop you and ask Melissa, did you decide to use the ladies' room, and were there services offered for you in the ladies' room?
It must not have been nearly as memorable as Lou's bathroom visit. I have no recollection of being propositioned at all.
Interesting.
But I will say Bangkok was a good time for us to get acclimated, to adjust for the time difference and the travel before we were moving to Phuket to have the bigger meeting, to have this higher level meeting with Keith's contact, Jimmy. And so I think it was a good time for us to, like Lou said, for us all to get more comfortable with each other, get in more of a rhythm, get adjusted before we were moving down to Phuket for the larger meeting.
Yeah, it more or less see how each other interact just in a social setting. That particular night, we ended up walking down, and this is like about 1:00 in the morning, and it was still bustling. And we saw this like an exhibition between 2 fighters. We had a beer, we watched them fight, and then we left there. And, you weren't bothered by anybody, right, Mel?
No. Although I will say, Lou, you're not helping our former supervisors think that this wasn't some boondoggle.
If we could only hear you talking about what a wonderful time you had.
So allow me to clean this up, Jerry, a little bit so we don't get ourselves in trouble here. No, I'm kidding. I do think Lou is right. It also helps give you these small little stories that when you're going into the big meeting, interacting with these targets, we have these small stories that be like, oh, do you remember that fight we went to? Oh my gosh, how about that bar? This. It made it look very believable to our stories that we were on vacation, tourists doing touristy things. And yes, there's going to be business that's done on this vacation, but I just think it lended to our whole story that we were these 2 couples that were traveling together and they're going to go off and do business, but we're just really very normal couples in this interaction.
Let me ask you another question, and that's the administrative side of this. Can you talk a little bit about post-country clearance and the LEGAD and your safety there, your backup there? What's going on with all of that? Because you just can't show up as undercover agents in a foreign country.
To be honest, that was all mostly handled by the case agent. My main objective was how we were going to attack this situation as far as these people were concerned and try to extract as much information as we possibly can. That was our job. All that other stuff, I mean, that I leave that to the administrative people. I didn't get involved in any of that.
Yeah, Lou's right. The case agents can handle all of that logistics. It allows our minds to be freed up for the work that we're doing. But yes, this is coordination between our legats. They knew we were coming over there. You have to be careful because of the relationships they have and how much you want people to understand that there are undercovers in country.
Mel, you're absolutely right. I mean, they were notified. And thank God they were, because this particular legat had his hands full. Am I right, Mel?
Right.
Yeah. So we'll get to that part.
And it's also good for the legat to be aware because there are just other random things that can happen. And we'll tell a quick story of us trying to leave the country after we were done.
Oh, yeah.
Our plane, as we were about to take off, caught on fire. And we had to be evacuated off of the plane down those slides.
Mm-hmm.
And, we ended up having to stay in country longer than we planned because of this situation that happened. And so there is a lot of logistics and coordination for our safety, for their knowledge about what is going on in country. So there is a lot of communications back and forth.
It's just something added to what you have to worry about. So thank God, the case agents The administrative people, they take care of that situation. If something does arise, we expect them to intercede and help us. Our main concern is who we're dealing with. So we leave Bangkok and then we meet Jimmy and Keith in Phuket. We are now trying to prepare for the meet. The night before I'm going to meet with Jimmy and Keith, I meet up with Nikki, who's the case agent, and the ASAC. This is a different ASAC, Bob McLaughlin, I think his name was. Anyway, we had already arranged that if we were going to buy super notes, we were going to buy $100,000 worth of super notes. But that night before, the ASAC tells me, along with Nikki, I think we ought to buy $40,000 worth of super notes. I said, $40,000? I said, there's no way. We're going from the United States to Phuket, Thailand, and I'm supposed to have like 40,000 in my pocket, let alone to buy super notes. Once the ASAC left, I told Mickey, I said, I'm going to offer 100,000. We look cheap. I'm rolling around in a Porsche. I'm taking these guys out, first class, this, that, and the other thing. I'm going to throw out $40,000 on this particular meet. No way. And then you'll see what happens even with 100,000. So the next day, Mark and I, we meet Jimmy and Keith. We had the room, it was wired for sound. And right off the bat, there was no real introductory thing. Right from Jump Street, Jimmy comes out and says, I want you to buy $5 million worth of super notes. I said, $5 million? I said, let me tell you something. I don't know you and you don't know me. I said, let's start small. And this way you get to know my operation. And then, down the road, we'll definitely go a lot larger than what we're doing. And so I said, how about $100,000? And then Jimmy says something to Keith. Keith says that'd come to about $339,000 in super notes, right? I said, well, okay. I said, that sounds pretty good. Jimmy then says something to Keith. And so now they're talking about, well, we'll put it in a 20-foot container, false bottom, and that's where the super notes will go. And we want 50,000 to load it. Once it's loaded, we want 50,000, and then we'll expect the 50,000 when you guys get the super note. He turned around and said, that sounds good to me. And then Keith tells me Jimmy never met an American, and he doesn't like Americans. I said, really? I'm over here talking to him, trying to do a deal, negotiate, and he doesn't like Americans. But I think he liked us. But then we had further discussion. And he was talking about the AK-47s, surface-to-air missiles. He also even talked about a submarine with a German engine in it that was for sale. I couldn't believe it. And I just shook my head. That night, everybody's more or less excited. They agreed. We're going to do this deal. It's 100,000. And we're going to get 339,000 false bottom thing with the container, the super notes.
Let me just work out the math. So you're saying that for every $100 super note bill that you purchase, you're paying $33 for it.
Right, exactly. Yep. Now everybody is in a tither because we solidified this deal or whatever. Now we go back to the room, and Nikki overheard the conversations. There was a bunch of people in the room with us. And now, because of all this other stuff that was going on, the cigarettes and so forth and so on, and all these other deals that we had off to the side, Nikki says, hey, we're trying to figure out how we're going to arrest all these people. And Melissa turns around and says, hey, why don't you and I get married? And then Nikki chimes in. He says, that's a great idea.
I want to jump in here, though, because I threw it out there half as a joke. I didn't think that that's where the case would end up. But Nikki's point was, at this point, they had targets all across the U.S. and now internationally.
Yeah.
And he's thinking down the road, however long that will be, how are we going to get these all at the same time? And so I really was just joking and saying, you should tell them that this trip bonded Lou and I together, solidified our love, and that we decided to get married and invite them to our wedding. Yeah. I will give Nikki credit that he said, we're totally doing that. And that's literally where we began planning the end.
Little did I know, Jerry, I worked harder on this wedding invitation than I did my own wedding invitations. Melissa is a very hard driver when it comes to some of these things.
Bridezilla.
Let me tell you, I never did so much work on a wedding in my life, doing the invitations and all this other stuff. It was unbelievable.
I should say that the wedding invitations Melissa and whoever else designed were the FBI artifact of the month. And I have a link to that article on the FBI website about this case and the wedding invitation. And I also have an image of the wedding invitation that I will put in the show notes. Very impressive. It looks like a real wedding invitation.
Technically, it is. We went to a real invitation place and had them made,
Yes.
trying to make our legend seem as legitimate as possible.
Yeah. Hey, listen, you know what? It was a great idea. You start to think about all these people not going to turn me down. I'm their meal ticket. I'm the one getting these containers into the United States. So they're feeling great. They're making money. Hey, I'm their money maker. You're not going to come to my wedding? Are you kidding me?
It would be an insult.
That's exactly right. Because if they didn't come,
It also builds trust and connection where Lou's saying, you're invited to my wedding. That must mean that you're special and important enough to get an invitation. It's not every low-level target of this investigation was invited to the wedding, right? It was only a certain level.
Yeah, just the people that, we came mostly in contact with and the guys in the peripheral. But all these other guys we made deals with, they're all included. That's why that total came up to 57 or whatever for New Jersey.
This is like the wedding of the year. I mean, there's not very many FBI undercover operations that culminate with a beautiful, lovely wedding in Cape May, New Jersey.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, everything was really falling into place until we were there a few days and we're, negotiating a bunch of different deals. And then we ended up having a day off. So that day off, management, supervisor, and the ASAC.
They were also on this trip to Thailand with you.
Right. On their day off, they decide to take a jet ski out and they come back. And the owner of the rental comes up to them and turns around and says, "You owe me 15,000 baht." And they're going, "What are you talking about?" He walks around the jet ski and there's a hole in the jet ski, which was obviously planted. "You owe me 15,000 baht, which is $3,000 US. He starts yelling and screaming. And then next thing you know, not but 15 yards away is this Thai policeman who, all intents and purposes, was involved in this whole thing to begin with. They're not getting anywhere, the ASAC and the supervisor, as far as these people are concerned. So what do? They end up badging their way and showing the Thai police who they are. Now, nobody on this island knew that, we had any presence whatsoever as far as being on this island. So now they present themselves. And that did not go over well. That Thai police took them down to the police station where they weren't getting anywhere until finally they end up calling the Legat. The Legat then eventually gets down there and rectifies the whole situation. Melissa and I and Mark and Monique, we are unaware of what's going on. That night or that afternoon, Nikki knocks on the door and comes in, and Mark and Monique come in, and Nikki tells us of this situation. I said to Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. Let's see. You not only have our surveillance people and security, but aren't the Thai police in your task force? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, isn't that a Thai police that was connected to these people that were, collecting the 15,000 baht and then giving these guys with credentials a hard time? He goes, no, it won't be a problem. I said, that's easy for you to say. Keith knows the chief of police, for God's sake. That was a little bit there. It was the first sign of a little bit being a little bit melancholy,
Were you meeting with the ASAC and the supervisor? Were people seeing you together and making that connection?
No. The only thing I was complaining about, and I don't know about Mel, was the fact that they flashed their badges, the FBI. We're undercover. Nobody knows that. But now all of a sudden, people in Phuket know, Thai police and that owner of that rental.
They know something's up.
I mean, who knows, right? So what happens next is we go out to dinner. It's Mel and I It's Monique and Mark, and it's Jimmy and Keith. And we have a nice dinner. We're sitting down, nice restaurant type of thing, and we're finishing up. And all of a sudden, Jimmy says to Keith, can we invite Lou up to the room, his room? So Keith turns and he says, Lou, you mind if you come with us? Yeah, no, that won't be any problem. So we have rented the 2 Mercedes on the island, one for us, and then we gave one to Keith and Jimmy. I said, listen, all right, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back and I'll join you. And then Mark followed me in. He goes, what do you think? I said, I don't think, it should be a problem. And the reason why I said that is because I don't think Keith would go against me in any way, shape, or form. I just had that feeling. And dealing with him and talking to him, I mean, we talked about family. The family was good. He was doing okay, that type of thing. So I had some confidence in Keith. And that's why I said what I said. I said, yeah.
But why would he want to go just with you? He didn't invite Mark along?
No, he didn't invite Mark.
I think at the time, it was an anomaly that they were asking for Lou only and saying, just you, come up to the room. They had already had these big conversations about these weapons deals and all this other business, in quotes. We thought business was done. And so I just remember as a newer undercover, seeing Lou as a seasoned undercover say, yeah, I'm not sure why they do want to meet. And I thought, oh my gosh, if you don't know what's going on, what is going on? And I think it's just that one that gave us all a little bit of a pause, or we weren't sure what they wanted and why they only wanted Lou and not Mark. And so I think that was a little bit of a pucker factor for all of us for a little while until we realized what they actually wanted.
Yeah, obviously, when you're in that situation, whatever, you never know what's going to happen. That's for sure. But once I got in the car, Jimmy had already been talking to people from North Korea about these AK-47s. So Keith ended up saying something about North Korea. And very broken English, I hear Jimmy say, don't ever say North Korea, say North Place when you're referring to North Korea. And I heard that. And that's what they wanted me to get up into the room so we can discuss this. So when we go up into the room, and now, Jimmy, through Keith, he says, listen, it's got to be $500 for an AK-47. I said, I'm not paying you $500 for an AK-47. I said, look, 2 years ago, I paid the Russians $100 for an AK-47 with mags, with bullets. You expect me to pay an extra $400 for an AK-47, not but 2 years later? I said, that's ridiculous. He goes, listen to me. And this is through Keith. He goes, if I do it, I can get to your price. He says, but if I get caught, which the likelihood is I could get caught, my family's dead. The people we know, they'll be dead. He said it would be a total disaster. The reason why it's 500, I got to pay these military officials off. I got to pay this other person off. He goes, and that's the reason why it's 500. I can't go any lower. And then I came back to him. I said, well, instead of 2,000, how about if we order up 5,000 AK-47s? Could you lower the price? He goes, absolutely not. I said, okay. I mean, it was worth a shot. I said, well, look, I'm going to have to get back to you. Then Keith turns to me, and that's where he says, where are the arms going? And I said, some of them are going to go into the U.S., well controlled. Most of them, the majority, they're going to go to people that we know in South America. And you know who I'm talking about. And he just acknowledged me more or less. And then he agreed. He told Jimmy what I said, and that floated. It all worked out. Thank God for that.
I do think, Lou, your experience, your history, you work so many of these cases with different people that he's able to answer things so much quicker and completely fitting for the role, and had so many interactions to understand how people in these situations talk and what they worry about and the concerns.
You know what it is too, Mel? When somebody asks you a question and you answer directly and right away, that goes a long, long way.
Credibility.
Because credibility, because, Keith, as long as I've been with Keith, back and forth and doing all these things, when Keith asked me that question, there was a lot behind that. He accepted it.
Lou always said something which I think is genius and applies to every industry. If you get introduced by the right person, you get less questions. He already had credibility with these people and it got built up. So Jimmy almost accepted Lou coming in the room because of all the work he had done with Keith and all the things that Keith said about him building up to it. And so it is so important these smaller interactions really build on each other to the point that you get to these higher level deals. It may be less questions because of the stuff you have done prior.
Mel, absolutely. I tell you what, I was doing a buy bust of Coke way, way back. I never got asked more questions on this 1 kilo of Coke. And I got patted, this guy put his hand down my back. And I said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And I said, you think I got a wire? We went back and forth. The lowest type of situations that you were involved in, the more questions are asked. Just like what you said. Once you develop credibility, they want to keep me. I'm their moneymaker. And they'll introduce me to anybody. I just wish the case could have went further along, but everybody was tired. I mean, 6 years, it was draining.
6 years?
Yeah.
And you're talking about the time where you initially were with Charles and May.
Keith saw what I did for Charlie. Keith wanted to be the number one guy. He introduces me to Jimmy. Jimmy knows all these other different people and the North Korean government. And I'm saying to myself, this is something. If we have more time, who knows what might have happened and where all this could have gone. God knows where. It was cushion for me. I could have kept this going on and on and on, but administratively, I'm sure those guys were just down and out. I mean, it's a heavy strain. And that's one thing I like doing the undercover stuff, actually. You did some paperwork or whatever, but I didn't have to deal with management. That was Nikki's job. They pointed me in the right direction. I tried to do the best I can and try to extract as much information as I can and then point me somewhere else. And I didn't have to deal with all that outside stuff.
What about consensual calls? Did you do a lot of recording?
I did over 1,000 recordings.
Wow. And did you record while you were in Thailand?
Yes, we recorded while we were in Thailand. Yeah, we did. Most of the situations, some situations obviously we didn't do. But from the time I met Charles and May to the end of this case, everything was recorded. It took a lot out of me too, because I was always on the phone. Always on the phone.
Sounds like Undercover is not a 9-to-5 job.
You know what it is though, Jared? I mean, if you're dealing with 1 or 2 people, that's one thing. But if you're dealing with 7, 8 people that are looking to make money off of you and they want to do business, it's a lot of pressure that way. Every little thing that undercovers do to try to enhance their credibility is really great. My wife said, I know why you're a good undercover. I said, why? She goes, you're a really good liar. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, what do I lie about? Never mind.
She's a little right. You're paid to lie. And the better you are at it, the bigger the case.
That's exactly right.
I think some of it too is good undercovers tend to really understand people and can watch and assess and understand their motivation and then speak to that. And so Lou knew the role he was playing and he understood what the others wanted and he plays right into that, whether it's greed or money or power or whatever.
Mel, you're absolutely right. You got to be on your feet and you're talking to someone. You have to evaluate them and what direction you're going to go. And usually, 9 out of 10 times, you could see how things are going to go.
So you'd finally make it back. What are your plans for receiving the super notes? Because that deal is going to go through.
Right. So what happens is finally in October, the shipment arrives in Port Elizabeth. We pay Jimmy. We wire the money to him, the other $50,000 that we said once we received it. So then, not but maybe a week or 2 after, because everything went well, we have a meeting with Jimmy, Keith, Jack, and I over at the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City. At the meeting, we finalize another sale we were going to buy $1 million of the super note. So then Jimmy turns around and he says, look, I'm going to tack on another 3 to 5 mil of the super notes as collateral for future business. Yeah, okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. Now I tell him I want to spend $1 million for the weapons. He says, look, I'm going to send you a catalog from North Korea, but it's going to be translated in English. It'll have everything conceivable. You pick out what you want, email me, and we'll work from that. So now there's, Jack and I, we're talking, and then Jimmy, he turns around and he starts talking about the 400 kilos of heroin. And he goes, it's through these Chinese diplomats. They deliver it with these diplomatic pouches. I said, a diplomatic pouch with 400 kilos. Now I'm thinking, small time, actually. He goes, no, a diplomatic pouch could be a container. In other words, once this gets to port, nobody can open that container. I mean, this is how they're getting the heroin in. So then Jack turns around to him and he says, listen, I got a friend of mine in Italy. We can do this deal. And Jimmy goes, all right, okay, just let me know when. Jack says, fine. And then we told them too, as far as the super notes were concerned, we wanted exclusivity on the money. We don't want anybody else dealing with that. Now, we consummate this whole thing, and Jimmy and Keith are leaving, but the surveillance picked up another individual talking to Jimmy and Keith, and they identify him as this Gun Lu. Now, Shu Gun Lu is a former security officer for the People's Republic of China. He was also deported from Canada for crimes against humanity, which was torture. And then he was also known as a large-scale ecstasy trafficker, known as the grower for hydropot. Eventually, Keith comes in to me, and he introduces me to Shu Gun Lu. I turn around to him, and I say, we want about 9,000 ecstasy pills. We ended up purchasing that, I think it was like around 36,000 or something like that. And then he turned around, he was trying to make arrangements for 20,000 of it up in Canada, up in Toronto. And we said, well, we'll try and work that deal out. We're almost there. So we're in December. Here comes the shipment. It's 3,015,000 super notes that arrive at the Port Newark. There's 390 grams of crystal meth that were in this false bottom labeled box of toys. All right, so now we get all this. That was 3,015,000 of the super notes and 390 grams of crystal meth. So now we had gotten the catalog. We put our order in. 50 rocket launchers, 1,200 AK-47s, 75 anti-tank rockets, 100 machine gun silencers. And then we sent Jimmy 50,000 for the arms deal. In the interim, for the 3 million, because now, Keith's saying, Jimmy, he needs money, he wants money or whatever. So periodically, we would throw at him 95,000. We'd throw 50,000 so that he felt a little comfortable as far as the super notes and then us giving him some money. He realized that. So we did a number of deposits for him. We're all set to do this thing, the arms deal, and the London bombings occur. And so with that, security heightens, and that's everywhere. So Jimmy turns around and says, listen, they're a little bit hesitant as far as transporting this stuff right now. We have to wait. Jack and I, we wanted to do the 400 key because I thought not only will we identify these Chinese diplomats, but the modus operandi of bringing it in under a diplomatic pouch when nobody can open it up but them. It was crazy stuff. And it would have been, I thought, the ending of a really good situation since they're postponing the arms deal. So what happens is there's a discussion as far as now wanting to take the operation down. Melissa and I, we send out invitations for August 24th, 2005 for the wedding. Now,
August 21st. You can't remember our wedding day? You know what's funny? The reason I remember that is it was my husband now, my fiance at the time. It was his birthday. Was the day that we were getting married. But he was deployed back in the Marines over in Iraq during this time. It was like a double hit for him.
Wow.
I was getting, having this big undercover case and this wedding, and he's in Iraq on his birthday.
Oh, geez. Oh, man. That's not fair. And especially when you're about ready to hear what we're about to say. So prior to the wedding, as all weddings do go, we had rehearsal dinner. And at this particular rehearsal dinner, Jimmy and Keith, it was us and Big Jack, his best man for the wedding. So we're all there, and Keith and Jimmy present Melissa and I with, these boxes. We open them up. They're Rolex watches.
Wow.
I said, whoa. And I said to Keith, Keith, don't tell me. Are these counterfeit? He goes, no, Lou, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you. I said, all right, are you sure? I said, because, my future wife, she's not going to appreciate this, counterfeit. And he goes, no. He goes, no, they're legit. I said, okay, all right. We partied that night. There were other parties. We were at Caesars, and then we went to Doc's, and it was almost like a karaoke thing. We all sang. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
It was like we did a bachelorette party type, where we were all together, went out and celebrating. We did a rehearsal dinner. So we did all the things that you do building up to a real wedding. And it allowed us time to interact with all of the targets that had come in for our wedding.
On that date, the 21st, we decided that we're going to take Jimmy and Keith out before that. And so I tell Keith, look, there's another party, and it's just going to be you guys and us, me and Jack. And so tomorrow, just meet us at such and such. So Jack and I take Jimmy and Keith, and I'm driving. Jack's in the passenger seat. Jimmy and Keith are in the back. I tell Keith and Jimmy more or less what Keith told me about Thailand. I said, listen, aside from all the parties and everything that we just gone to, this is going to be a really good bachelor party. Keith was saying stuff about, you're not going to come out of your room. I probably won't see you guys for the wedding. This is how good this is going to be. These women are unbelievable. So now I'm looking in the rear view, and I see Jimmy, and I see him start to grab something. Jack looks back, and here's Jimmy. He's popping these pills. And Jack goes, what's that? And Jimmy goes, he says, Viagra. So he's getting ready for this big party, and he's trying to get himself all ready as far as the women are concerned. The FBI is building is like in this like insurance company type of thing. And so it's nondescript. So we roll up in there, and I said I have to pick up another guy. Keith and I get out, and Jimmy's in with Jack in the car. So the plan is that when we walk through the corridor, there's these big double doors, and the state police are supposed to be behind these doors, and then we're supposed to walk by, and as we walk by, they're supposed to grab us, right? Well, now we're walking by, and we're still walking. Now we're headed towards the elevator. And I'm saying to myself, we can't, there's 2 floors, and the second floor, the FBI is waiting for us up there. Finally, they get out, and they run towards us. They grab me. They throw me on the ground. And Keith, they went to grab him, and I don't know, like if he tried to make a move or something like that. Well, they grabbed him, and they threw him down, and they made sure they handcuffed him, so forth. Jack said something to that. I don't know whether Jimmy went into some type of karate move or whatever, but I think he relinquished that move rather quickly when FBI and the state police converged on him, and he didn't have a chance. Now it's Keith and I, and we're in the elevator. We don't say anything to each other. And we go up towards the second floor, and they grab Keith, they put him in a room, and they put me outside. They take the cuffs off. Now they're interrogating Keith. And what about this guy, Lou? What's he mean to you? He goes, he's just a friend of mine. We know you're doing business with him. Keith goes, I don't know what business you're talking about. He protected me so much. He never gave me up. Never gave me up. The interviewing agent came out to me. He goes, look, you got to go in there because he ain't giving you up. So I had to go in there. He sat back on the seat, type of thing. Like, are you kidding me? I said, listen, Keith, I'm sorry. I said, look, this is business. This isn't personal or anything like that. And he just shook his head. He said, I understand. I said, well, what do you think? With his fingers, he motioned them to come back in. And that's when he knew the gig was up.
You've been dealing with him for a few years now. Do you feel something about having, quote unquote, betrayed him?
Jared, I don't like that betrayal. And I know you're right, okay? With Keith, I really, really felt bad. Keith was the type of person, he's very easygoing. He's got like a monotone type of voice. He's quiet. I just liked him. I think he was personable in his own way. He never gave me any slack, as far as, about a load or this, that, or, anything. And he was willing to back me up on certain situations. So I feel bad. There are certain people I can't stand, like that guy, Derisi. He was a half-ass mob guy. He used to come over and kiss me on the cheek. I told him I don't like that. And then plus the fact he was arrogant. He was all for himself, and that was a problem. The eventuality is when Derisi ended up going to jail, he put a hit out on me and Jack. They had to get that resolved.
Why did you decide to take down Keith and Jimmy before the wedding? And how did that affect the other arrests that you made on the wedding day?
They didn't know that, the other people. Nobody knew, as far as that was concerned. Now, this decision wasn't our decision. That was the case agent's decision to do that. And I guess he wanted to extract as much information. So on that wedding day, I think it was 15, 16 people. I can't remember how many. There's a lot of things that are going on. You got agents, they're bringing in all these people and they're interviewing them. And then you have these agents going to the case agent to ask them, well, he said this, what should I come back him with? It's a lot. What I think Nikki, and which was the right decision to do, was to get these two and deal with those two for that particular day. Get as much information as you could, if in fact they're going to talk, and extract what you can. And then that's it. You're done, basically with them. And now you deal with the rest of these people. And because these are the two important people that you really wanted, along with Charles, two other people to deal with. But yeah, that was Nikki's decision to do. But to me, that was the right thing to do. It was a good decision. What'd you think, Mel?
Yeah, I agree. I think at some point you just have to pick and choose. You could probably second guess every decision.
Well, I have a very important question for Melissa. Did you wear a wedding dress on that day?
I didn't. But what I did get, which was fun, is when we returned from Thailand, we now understand that we're going to plan a wedding. So I get to call our headquarters office that helps undercovers and gives them props to help build up your legend. And I said, I'm involved in this case and I need a wedding ring. And so they FedExed to me a package that had 5 different diamond rings in it that I was able to sit at my desk in New York City and just pick whichever one I wanted. And Jerry, which one did you think I picked?
The biggest one?
Of course. So I got to pick a 4+ carat diamond ring that I would wear every time Lou and I would go out over this next year or so of planning this wedding. I would go to the safe and put on my big diamond ring and go play my part.
Which she played very well. Do you remember, Mel? We took Charles and May out to dinner.
Yes.
During that time, and I forget where we went. But so Melissa had the ring on her finger. May grabbed her hand and looked at it, and she goes, "Oh my God!" And then she looked at me and she goes, "You must really love her."
Sometimes people in these situations that care about money do evaluate it that way.
Tell me about the wedding day and the takedowns.
So we booked mostly all of them, I believe, at the Taj. So their wives and their girlfriends and so forth were at the Taj, and then the wedding's on a yacht called the Royal Charm, so forth and so on. However, you're going to have to make one stop. So we had 2 limos. The agents were the ones driving. So they roll up on the Taj. These people were already instructed, this is what we're going to do. And so they all rolled into the limos. They took their time. Like the first one went, and the driver said, look, we got to pick up somebody else, and then we'll be on our way. And they said, okay, fine, whatever. So then he rolled up to that building that I was talking about. Next thing you know, FBI agents, state police, so forth, they ended up grabbing the people out, handcuffed them, brought them, I guess, upstairs to be fingerprinted and interviewed and so forth. Then shortly thereafter, the first limo had taken off. The second limo had picked up a whole bunch of people, wives and girlfriends and so forth. And they roll up. And it was the same type of situation. FBI, state police, we end up arresting them. And now in this particular load, it's Charles and May, right? And so when Charles is handcuffed and he's going in towards the building, he looks up at one of the FBI agents there and he says, "Hey, listen, Lou and Melissa, they're still getting married, right?" And the agent goes, "Oh, yeah, they're getting married, all right." Charlie still thought that Melissa and I were still getting married. So after all this stuff, after everybody's getting arrested, so forth and so on, they still want to believe. We did pretty good, Mel, as far as making May and Charlie believe, you know?
We did. Yeah, they were, unless they probably just wanted to believe it for themselves because maybe it meant what was happening wasn't really true.
So how many people, did you say 15 were arrested that day?
I think it was 15, 16. Yeah, don't quote me, Jerry. I don't remember.
And did they plea or was there a trial?
Charles got 11 years for conspiracy and racketeering. May ended up having a severe stroke, and she didn't get anything as far as sentencing or anything like that. She was paralyzed her whole left side. Keith got 6 years and racketeering and conspiracy. Jimmy got 4 years for the same thing, and that's as far as I know as far as those people.
The major players, but there were also other people charged and convicted from this. People want to learn more about this case and how it all ended. I have lots of news articles about Operation Royal Charm that you provided and that I found, and I will link them in the show notes for this episode on my website, jerrywilliams.com.
Okay, well, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. I need to let everybody know there is going to be a movie made, a comedy, I understand, based on this case. Why don't you two tell me a little bit more about that?
We read recently that there was a movie that is being written based off of this case, and I think it's starring Anne Hathaway and David Bautista. And they're going to play it as a comedy based off of this case and the relationship between the male and female undercovers.
Pretty cool. I heard from a listener, thank you, Karen, who sent me, not even knowing that I was getting ready to interview you about a week or two ago, she sent me a link to an article about this movie that's being made. It was just so weird and such a coincidence that I was able to let her know that I was going to be interviewing you about this case. So I'll also put the link to the article in the show notes. And of course, when the movie comes out, I'll probably be in touch with you both so that we can review the movie and talk about whether or not there are any teachable moments about the FBI that we can find in the movie.
Yeah, but you know what, Mel, too? I mean, there were so many things that they would have been able to talk to us. And even though it would have been a comedy, I think we could have added a lot of things to it. I'm sure they're going to be creative and make up stuff. So
there were definitely parts of our experience that were funny. So I'm sure they can pick parts out and find those little vignettes that make it.
No, there were some, that's for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we are almost at the end of the episode where I like to ask my standard questions. And so, Melissa, why don't you go first and let us know when and why you joined the FBI?
I joined the FBI in 1999. I don't have the normal path of FBI agents. I was a psychology major in college and worked as a counselor prior to getting to the FBI. I think the reason I did get in was my psychology background, my interest in people really drew me in to understand, like, why do people do bad things? I found that part fascinating. And it was all the things I hoped it would be. My psychology degree helped me being an undercover and then helped me in my later years being a crisis negotiator. I didn't know anything about the FBI until I was working in my first job. Somebody that I worked with had said her whole life she wanted to be an FBI agent. I found that funny because I thought, do you even know anybody that's an FBI agent? How do you even do that? And somebody got us an application as a joke and gave her the application that said, here, go follow your dream, and gave me the application like, here, smartass, here's how you do it. And strangely enough, I'm the one that proceeded and actually got in, and the other woman who had thought about it didn't. do it. So it's funny how life turns in different directions, but it must be meant to be.
And you spent time in New York and Cleveland as an agent?
Correct. I was first assigned out of Quantico to New York City. I was there for about 8+ years and then transferred to Cleveland where I finished out. I retired 2.5 years ago, and I took my love of negotiations, and I now work as a consultant and trainer in the field of negotiations, de-escalation, conflict resolution. So I work with different companies and across all industries and helping them do their business negotiations, or if they're a public-facing company and dealing with clients, and how everybody seems to be escalating every situation these days, helping them navigate those difficult conversations and de-escalating. So it's been fun. It's a good way to use my skills and experience from Undercover and from negotiation stuff I was involved in. And I started my own company called Alchemy Team, and I do contract work with several different groups. One is actually a group that's a bunch of retired FBI agents called the Bureau Consortium. So it's all of us coming together with our different experiences and training around workplace violence and safety.
All right. Well, I will put a link to your consulting company in the show notes of this episode. So if anybody's interested in contacting you, they'll know how to do it. I like to give my guest the last word. So, Melissa, what would you like to say?
I would encourage everyone to apply to the FBI if you are so lucky to get in. It was the best job in the world. I didn't realize that I was going to end up there, but I'm so glad I did. I learned so much. We had so much fun. And so I encourage especially women. The Bureau needs people from all different backgrounds, all different kinds of people. As you can see from Undercover cases, all these different types of people and different roles, we need that diversity. It's so important. So that would be my pitch for the FBI.
All right, Lou, you're up. When and why did you join the FBI?
Well, now I'm going back, way, way back, 1970.
I wasn't even born yet.
Yeah, don't be quiet. Anyway, my father-in-law, Jack Ganley, who was a supervisor in the Philadelphia division, he was longing to have his two sons get into the FBI. And there was no way that those two sons were going to go into the FBI. Now, I was going out with his daughter at that particular time, and he approached me as far as going into the FBI. Now, I really didn't have aspirations per se, but the more and more he talked about it, the more and more, I was interested, even though it was in a clerical capacity at that time. Now, I get into the FBI. I'm in the Philadelphia division. A couple of my friends also are clerical employees in the FBI. And what actually happened was I saw the way the agents' work ethic and the camaraderie and what they were doing and how they were doing it. And that in itself enhanced me. Then I really, really want to be an FBI agent because I saw how they worked and what they did and how they worked together. And I said, that's what I want to do. And this is what I want to do. As a clerical employee, I did the mail runs and that type of thing or whatever. So I was going to school at night. And then sometimes we switched and then I would go during the day and then I had to work at night. I was in business administration at the time and I was able to get my degree. I think I waited about a year and a half after I got my degree. And then myself and my buddy, Dennis Murray, we went to Quantico together.
And so you spent all of your career working mostly undercover out of the Newark division, but I guess working cases all over the country.
Yes, that's where the cases took us. The hub was Atlantic City, Newark, but the work doing the undercover thing took us everywhere.
So what are you doing now?
Actually, all I'm doing now, Jerry, is taking care of my grandkids and enjoying life, actually. Traveling a little bit here and there, go down to Florida, come back, Cindy and I, and then being with the kids, going out to California to see my other daughter and her family. And that's keeping me busy. I mean, this month, I'm going to be 75. I thoroughly enjoy all this. That keeps me occupied, actually. Don't get me wrong. I love what I did, but I'm content.
From all the different stories that you have to tell, you should write a book. You've got a book's worth. So I'd love to encourage you to write that book and come back on the show to launch the book and discuss more of your cases.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I'll take you up on that as far as the book is concerned. I may just do that.
Very good. Well, it's your turn to give us your words of wisdom. You've got the last word. So, what would you like to say?
I echo what Melissa said as far as the FBI is concerned. It's encouraging. The people are fantastic. The camaraderie, the work. For me, you couldn't ask for a better job. However, in doing these cases, when I was writing the book, the ending would have been the world is held on by a Band-Aid. And the reason why I say that is if you can develop, credibility and money and people with contacts, you can get anything. Hope nothing gets into the wrong hands. That's what I mean when the world is held on by a Band-Aid. Working for the FBI, you get into a lot of these situations, especially with people that are connected to governments. Thank God for the FBI. They are unbelievable, and they're the best at it, believe me. There is no question in my mind. They're always looking out for you. So I am thankful for the FBI.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find photos of Lou Calvarese and Melissa Fortunato, along with lots of case-related news articles and images. There's also a link to the FBI Retired Case File Review episode featuring the Los Angeles Division's parallel undercover operation with retired agent Bob Hamer, episode 78, Counterfeit $100 Bills, Operation Smoking Dragon. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.